Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Salesforce Ben LinkedIn Live, this time in collaboration with Prodly. So my name is Zaina Dar, and I'm the events content producer at Salesforce Ben, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's event as we delve into strategies for optimizing Salesforce operations across various roles. So in today's digital age, efficient communication and collaboration are essential for streamlining Salesforce operations. Yet all too often, misaligned priorities and limited visibility can lead to a sluggish change management process and a never-ending backlog. That's why in today's session, we're here to provide you with actionable insights to overcome these challenges. So while we wait for everyone to join, please let us know where you're logging in from today. We always love to see what a global audience we have attending. Okay, so thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited to introduce to you Max Rodman, CEO at Prodly, who's here with us today to share his expertise in optimizing Salesforce operations. Max, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much, Zaina. I'm really delighted to be here and thrilled to be holding this webinar. As Zaina said, my name is Max Rodman. I am the CEO of Prodly. Prodly is building an end-to-end platform for application lifecycle management, aka DevOps, that connects IT and business operations users such as RevOps, which is obviously the topic of conversation today. My experience in the ecosystem goes back to 2006. Previously, I was a founder of a company called Steelbrick that was acquired by Salesforce in 2016 and is now Revenue Cloud product line, which comprises of Salesforce CPQ and Salesforce Billing. So this topic of driving efficiencies across, RevOps and IT and streamlining business processes has been a passion of mine for a long time. Really delighted to be here again to chat to you about what I've learned and give you some hopefully actionable insights.
Great, thank you. So before we get started, just a few house rules. So as this is a webinar, all lines are muted, but don't worry, we'll be having a Q&A at the end for you to ask Max any burning questions you may have. So feel free to submit the questions in the comments throughout the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded and will be available on our Salesforce Ben LinkedIn and YouTube channel, just in case you need to drop off or would like to share it with your colleagues. Fab. Well, I'll hand it over to you, Max, to take us through the presentation, and I'll see you at the end for the Q&A.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Zain, again, and welcome everyone to this webinar. So we're going to talk about bringing IT and revenue operations together to streamline change management in Salesforce. So let's maybe level set on why IT and RevOps need to be able to work together, why it's so important. Obviously, both teams are super critical to well-run Salesforce operations and maintaining the Salesforce platform in the most efficient way possible. RevOps is, the conduit to business, right? So I'll just start with them. I'll go in a slightly reverse order than what's here on the slide, right? They are there to intake requirements from business. They understand what business needs are, and they surface those requirements to the IT team, which is there, to execute. Obviously, hopefully, also provide some feedback on, architecture feedback on helping them solution it, right? But ultimately, the IT team is responsible for delivery. So I think it goes without saying that both are critical, both are important for optimal operation and the efficient operation of Salesforce. And if this is a well-oiled machine, as it should be, right, it's going to drive a lot of business value, right, from increased innovation, from increased efficiency, and ultimately the business agility. Right. When we take a step back and think about, Salesforce as, a business, enterprise business platform that's at the center of digital transformations, right? We've heard this, term used all over, many times over the past several years. Salesforce talks about this all the time, right? And so when you kind of peel back a little bit, what's involved in the digital transformation, agile business systems is an absolutely critical piece and component of that. And of course, Salesforce being sort of the front office, the customer relationship management platform, is absolutely at the center of this. So if you can drive agility, if you can drive efficiency in change management in Salesforce, you will drive business agility in your business systems and ultimately a successful digital transformation. All right. Well, now that we hopefully covered a little bit about why it's important for IT and RevOps to work together well, let's maybe look at some at the specifics of hopefully some actionable insights about what that might look like. So, what are the components of the streamlined change delivery process of IT and business operations teams like RevOps working well together? So the first step is to establish a formal change management process, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that, but so this is the process by which changes are surfaced, triaged, prioritized, made, reviewed, and delivered, right? Step 2 is to implement an integrated work management system. So a work management system is a fancy word for a project management or agile planning system. There's many of them around. We'll talk about some of the most popular ones, but this is basically where you manage the units of work called work items or stories sometimes. And it's sort of like the central place that ties everything together, and that's super important for visibility, which we'll cover in more detail later on in the webinar. Step 3 is adhering to DevOps principles. So DevOps is a hot topic in Salesforce ecosystem right now, and one of the reasons is because it's so essential, so critical to a well-oiled change management process. So what's in here? We'll cover this in more detail, but things like release automation, automated testing, etc. Fourth component is empowering the RevOps team, right? And this is a little bit controversial, but I firmly believe it's at the core of making, of streamlining the change delivery process. And what this is talking about is enabling your business partners on the RevOps team to make certain kind of changes themselves, right? Not all changes, but certain kind of changes themselves, and so they can unbottleneck IT and accelerate the change delivery process overall. And step 5, which is a little bit of corollary to number 4, but not necessarily, is implementing a governance framework, right? So whether you're scaling, and ultimately want to go public, or, maybe you're already public company, or, maybe you're in a highly regulated industry, striking the right balance between, agility, speed, and control is going to be very important. And so you'll need to find what that balance is for your organization and define a governance framework that fits your requirements. So let's go through each of these in a bit more detail. And as we said, we're going to have time for Q&A later on in the show for you to ask questions. All right, so let's start with establishing a formal change management process. So what's a formal change management process? Well, it's a structured process to execute change from start to finish, right? From ideation to deployment to production, and even beyond that for monitoring the change and its impact on business. So the first piece of this is a structured intake of change requests, right? Which is a responsibility of RevOps. So what do I mean by structured intake of change requests? Well, what I mean is not taking them over the phone, over email, over Slack, as great as that is, but using a a database like, a structured system. Could be Jira, could be, a work management system itself, or it could be something that sits up front from that. Like, an example would be an ITSM solution, IT service management solution like ServiceNow, or, Atlassian has, a version of, has a product called Atlassian ITSM, which is built on the foundation of Jira, designed for this use case, right? Maybe to put it more simply, it's a ticketing system, right? Where the end users can log tickets, can make requests for certain bits of functionality, and that is then collected and goes into RevOps for review and prioritization. Right. This is also a very critical step because, especially if you have end users logging these, right, what you're going to find is, you're going to find a lot of duplicates, right? You're going to find, them putting multiple requests in one record, or, and so you may need to combine multiple requests into one, or you may conversely split one request into multiple requests because they're actually different bits of functionality that are being requested. Right. So this triaging process, as I call it, is super important to provide clean inputs to IT to do the next step, which is the technical feasibility analysis and ultimately planning, which includes solutioning and architecture. Right. Garbage in, garbage out. So the more work you do up front as a RevOps team to clean up the tickets, to clean up the change requests, the better outcome you're going to get from your IT partners in terms of delivering the functionality. Next step is development and testing, right? So this is the part where hopefully you get RevOps involved, right? We talk a lot broadly about citizen developers and how do you enable them to be effective participant in the change management process. Right. The development, when we say development here, we use the term a little bit loosely. It's not just referring to kind of writing code, right? Development being both imperative development, writing code, as well as declarative development, which is done by admins, right? Configuring flows, validation rules, page layouts, right? Data model changes, all the declarative controls that Salesforce platform gives you, as well as making changes to config data, right? So if you have something like CPQ, for example, it's very heavily driven by configuration data or configuration that's stored as data as opposed to metadata. Think your product catalog, right? The pricing, the rules that go around CPQ. And it doesn't have to be CPQ, right? There's field service. Field service is another example of an app that's heavily driven by configuration data. So there's lots of different examples, and that's a great area. We'll talk more about this. Great area of opportunity to look at offloading some of that work to your both declarative developers, i.e., admins, as well as your RevOps business partners. So after development and testing, the next step is review and feedback, right? So hopefully you're not making changes directly in production, and you're making them in development environments, then promoting them to QA and UAT type of environments if it's a bigger project. And that's a great opportunity for RevOps to provide their feedback on the functionality, because obviously they're the closest to the business, the closest to the end users. They hopefully understand what they need and what they want and can provide good feedback. Once the review and feedback took place and maybe corrective action is executed based on that feedback, the next step is deployment. There's multiple deployments throughout the process, as I mentioned, from DevOps to from development environment to QA to UAT, but ultimately to production, right? This is what it's referring to. So obviously a very important step. You want to make sure that it goes without a hitch, and you're not bringing down a mission critical system like Salesforce in the process. And last but not least, as I said, is this idea of monitoring. Once the changes have gone in, how do they do, right? Did they deliver the business value that you're hoping for, right? If you're making a pricing change, did that lead to more sales, or did that lead to reduction in discounting and the average increase in the average sales price, right? Those are the kind of outcomes, the business outcomes that you want to be measuring, because ultimately, it's what matters. It's the yardstick by which the effectiveness of IT and RevOps is measured. All right, let's talk about step 2, which is implementing an integrated work management system. So as I said, this is really sort of a project management, as maybe put it more broadly. And the idea here is that these change requests that originate in ITSM, or maybe I'll log directly into a work management system, depending on the complexity of your organization. They are, this is what ties everything together, right? This is the ultimate why for the what of the changes that you're making, right? So it's super important to be tracking these in a structured format in the database, in the system. And it's also very important to link the changes, i.e. the what, to the stories, the why, for all kinds of reasons, to provide visibility into progress to different stakeholders. But also, this is going to be super important for auditing, right? If you're a public company, with deployment of things like CPQ, certainly, and potentially other applications, Salesforce is now in scope for SOX compliance, right? So sooner or later, you're going to be called upon to show that the process that you put in place, that you say you have, is actually being followed, and proving that the changes took place as a result of approved change requests is a key component of that audit. So having the infrastructure to provide those reports is going to be super important for your internal auditors and your ability to pass external audits as well. Tracking the units of work in a system like Jira and others is obviously very important for robust reporting on to measure key metrics of sort of DevOps metrics, as things like velocity, as well as the so-called DORA metrics around reliability and the quality of the changes you're making. And while certainly this is not the exhaustive list, these are some of the most popular work management systems that we've seen, right? Jira from Atlassian, Boards from Azure. It's a Microsoft suite of DevOps tool called Azure DevOps, and so there's multiple different services in there, and Boards is their work management module. And then GitHub has its own called Issues. So both are very popular, as well as GitLab. So those, I would say, like the major work management systems that are part of the kind of broader DevOps platforms. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Agile Accelerator, which is a little bit of a niche product, but it's actually a free app that's built on the Salesforce platform. It's actually a Salesforce app. It's not a commercially supported application. It's on the App Exchange, listed by Salesforce Labs. So it's kind of not quite open source, but it's free, but unsupported. But it's a great place to start, right? If you're maybe on the smaller side of the organization, and these kind of more robust solutions is too much, this is a great place to start. Just download it into your Salesforce org, and it comes with the object to log the change request, as well as the UI to kind of schedule work items in sprints and track the units of work right in Salesforce. All right, so 3, adhering to DevOps principles. So we talked a little bit about how DevOps and the automation that it brings is key to accelerating the change delivery process, right? Specifically the implementation part of that process. And so a couple of ideas to highlight that are really important. One is this idea of environment management, right? And so you at least want each developer to have their own org, preferably spin up a separate org, whether it's a scratch org or a sandbox for each work item, right? It's very important because it really eliminates a lot of problems downstream, a lot of like merge conflicts, right? And things like that. If everybody is, sort of piling into a shared full copy or partial copy sandbox, and you have, particularly in the more complex setup where you have multiple work streams going on in parallel, right? That's a lot of work that goes in one org, and a lot of opportunity for folks to step on each other's toes. You don't want that. Automating sandbox management sort of, again, refers to like the ability to quickly and efficiently spin up these orgs on demand, but also make sure that they are properly configured for whatever development work is ahead of you, right? And it may mean, having certain parts of your metadata in an org. If it's a scratch org, obviously sandboxes come with metadata already, but if it's a scratch org, you have to populate the right set of metadata. And most likely you'll need some configuration data in there. If you're making changes to, say, CPQ, right, you probably want your CPQ product catalog, which of course is product, price books, but then all the CPQ objects like price rules, product rules in there, as well as a smattering of test data, right? So you can test your changes, which in this case will probably be some accounts, some opportunities, some quotes that you can test your changes on. So speaking of testing, obviously unit testing and sort of manual testing is part of it, but you also want to have some strategy for automated regression testing, right? You want to make sure that not only the change that you made works, but that as making that change, you didn't break something that inadvertently break something that in other parts of the system that used to work and now doesn't. All right, let's get into step 4, which is empowering the RevOps team. So again, I think this is super important, a little bit controversial, because a lot of the IT teams that, I talk to are, reluctant to sort of hand the keys to the kingdom to to business users. They're afraid that, they will mess things up. And, that's certainly a valid concern. And I think there's some strategies to mitigate the risk, but the benefits are tremendous, right? Because if you can unburden your team, if you can unbottleneck the IT team by offloading certain kind of changes, obviously declarative changes, maybe even changes to data, to your business partners, that makes you more productive. It gives you more time to spend on items that only IT team can do, that only developers can do, and it accelerates the whole process, increasing business agility. So how do you do this, and what are some of the areas where you can look to do this? Well, one of the sort of the most obvious areas, as I said, is making changes to config data. So maybe you're changing your pricing once a quarter, right? Which is not, on a common business process. So, right, something like this can and should be done by RevOps, or maybe even by product management teams that ultimately source that information. So if you can provide them with the right tools, the low code, no code tools, kind of think of like wizard interfaces to make those changes, and give them enough guardrails, and have them obviously do that in a test environment that is isolated from the rest of your, certainly from production, maybe, other important sandboxes, that really reduces the risk of, any kind of mistake that they may inadvertently make affecting your development process, or God forbid, bringing down a production system. So again, this goes back to having a strategy for efficient environment management, and being able to spin up those on demand and configure them with enough test data and enough config that the users operate on to give them a productive development environment, but also having, the automated release management tools, which includes approvals, so that once these users are done making the changes and, test them, you can then run some automated regression testing on top of that, and also have it go through an approval process where the changes are reviewed and validated, and then promoted by somebody in IT, a release management type of, or release manager type of role. All right, and last but not least is a governance framework. Right. So the idea here, of course, is to provide guardrails to mitigate risk. And frankly, this applies to your less technical citizen developer type of users as much as it does to your pro developer type of users. Right. So things like version control, right? Version controlling both metadata and data side of your Salesforce config is critical for tracking, for auditing, for having that audit trail of the changes being made, but also for being able to roll back from any potential defects or disruptions to service. Right, and you want to make sure that this version control, obviously, as I said, covers not just your code, but all of your Salesforce config, which includes declarative metadata as well as configuration data. Access controls. This goes a little bit into the next point of separation of duties, right? But you don't want your business users to be able to promote, deploy to production, as an example, right? In fact, you probably don't want your developers to be able to promote the production, right? You want to make sure that there is, a centralized release manager role, maybe, one person or a few people who can actually promote the production, but developers can promote from, dev environments, to from feature branches, from feature development environments to a shared dev environment, or to QA, and etc. So setting up that process with the right level of controls for each type of user is very important to having a robust governance framework. And then the separation of duties that gives is also going to be absolutely critical for something like SOX compliance, right? Your auditors are going to want to see that the people who request the changes to pricing are not the people who are actually making them, and are not the people who are deploying them. So introducing that redundancy is in part what makes for controls that SOX demands. So not only setting this up and having the policies around this, but also being able to prove that you actually have these controls and they're being followed is actually the point of an audit that you're going to be going through every year. All right, well, that sort of covers the 5 steps of our process. And with that, I think we can move on to questions. You're muted, Zane.
Rookie error. Thank you. So thanks so much for that really insightful presentation, Max. Hopefully our audience now feels much better equipped to kind of tackle the challenges of optimizing Salesforce operations in their organizations. So without further ado, it's time for our Q&A. So if you have any questions for Max, please feel free to submit them in the comments, and we'll try to get round to as many as possible. So let's see what we have. So ideal, but in reality, IT are burdened with more tasks. RevOps hands over their untested changes to IT for deployment, then guess who needs to fix errors during deployment?
Yeah, so that's a great point and a valid point. And so in case I didn't make myself clear, right, I'm not advocating that you just kind of have a free for all and just let your RevOps and business partners just give them the keys to the kingdom. The key is, as I said, is putting around, through technology and processes, putting these guardrails together. So like in this specific example, why are there untested changes, right? And why there are errors that you uncover during the deployment process that create issues, right? It could be that they have access to more config than they should, right? And they inadvertently make a mistake, and and trying to say change prices in the price book, they may screw up the product or something else. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that they did make the changes that they intended to, but they don't work, right? Because they didn't test them properly. And so, well, why did they not test them properly? Is it because they didn't have the environment that had the right set of test data in it, maybe, or maybe they broke something else in another part of the system inadvertently, and that goes back to regression testing. So having a regression testing and automated testing strategy is one of the techniques to mitigate against that. Mm-hmm. So I'm certainly not, disputing with the dangers and the pitfalls of this, right? But and I'm not suggesting that you give your business users unmitigated access to Salesforce and just let them loose. But these are really, really real concerns. But there's definitely ways to mitigate that. And as I said, it takes some work, it takes some thinking through, but the rewards are massive.
Great. So what's the problem with developing in a shared full or partial sandbox?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is not uncommon pitfall that we see with our customers and prospects that we talk to. And, the main issue, as I said, you just really, the more people you have piling into a shared environment, the higher the chances of them stepping on each other's toes, of overriding each other's changes, of you creating conflicts down the road if you're using a version control system like Git, right? Things like merge conflicts. The probability of that really skyrockets the more people you have sharing an environment. And incidentally, the reason that happens, of course, is because it's so hard to have a fully functional, properly configured test environment, or it's so hard to spin it up, right? The sandboxes come with metadata, but they don't come with data, right? Only the full and partial do, which is why that's the most commonly shared type of environment. But with the right tooling and the right process, you can overcome those deficiencies in the Salesforce platform and get to a place where you're using all kinds of environments that are allocated to you: Scratch orgs, Dev sandboxes, Dev Pro sandboxes, and having each of them be fully configured, properly configured for a particular development task that's in front of you.
Great. Cool. So just seeing some people joining. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments for Max. So can you provide an example of a situation where empowering the RevOps team with low-code or no-code tools resulted in significant improvements in operational efficiency?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most common example we hear from customers is this use case of updating price books and prices, right? And maybe doing sort of light CPQ config. Certainly price book updates is something that many companies do on a regular basis, right? At least once a quarter. Well, maybe as few times as once a year, as many times as once a month, but more typically once a quarter. And that's a great example of a use case where enabling your business partners to make those changes just makes a lot of sense. You're just cutting out the middleman, right? Because ultimately those changes come from them, right? They are the ones, or maybe it's your product management team, right? They're the ones who are sourcing the changes to pricing that you need to make. And so why not let them make those changes themselves with the right set of tools and the proper guardrails and the proper oversight and the approval process at the end, right? I'm not suggesting they go and make that directly in production or have the ability to, promote those changes to production, but certainly giving them a dedicated development environment that's properly configured for that task, and giving them the tools to make those changes is a great technique to sort of achieve that the higher efficiency and ultimately business agility.
Nice. Okay. So how can companies effectively implement governance frameworks without stifling innovation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a trade-off, as I said, right? It's like, how do you go fast without breaking things, as one of our customers put it to us, and that's an eternal CIO dilemma, right? And executive dilemma. It's a problem that vexes many IT organizations. And I think, in truth be told, I'm not sure there is a right or wrong answer. It's, as I said, it's a trade-off between those two things, and so you're just going to have to find where that balance is for you. But the levers that you have, I mean, we talked about, right? That's the approvals and the testing and kind of these guardrails that you can, with the right tooling, easily put in place that will mitigate the overhead of compliance, right? But the reality is, the more of these controls, the more of these gates, the more of these guardrails you have, the more hoops one has to jump from on the path from ideation to delivery. The slower the process is going to be, right? And kind of what that trade-off is, you have to decide for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are some practical strategies for introducing low-code or no-code tools to less technical users within an organization?
Yeah, what I would say is, and obviously this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and something we're very focused on solving this problem with Broadly. What I think works well, and what I would start is, again, like picking an easy, simple, very business-driven use case, like making pricing changes, or like product configuration changes, whether you have CPQ or not. Right. For other domains, I mean, there may be other tasks, right? Like, so think about a task that's, relatively, like, certainly doesn't involve coding, right? Probably doesn't involve making declarative configuration system to Salesforce, right? You don't want your RevOps people to be messing with flows and things like this. Maybe a kind of page layout changes is another, example where I think is, a very low risk change that actually you can make in production in a lot of cases. And then the important piece there becomes is having a backporting strategy to make sure that that change gets, backported to the beginning of your development pipeline and gets checked into the source control, so it doesn't get overwritten next time somebody does a promotion, right? But those are like changing a page layout, right? Maybe adding a field, and making changes to the pricing and product catalog are the kind of the three use cases that I think they're the most obvious candidates to explore with your business partners.
Okay, cool. And can you share any best practices for maintaining governance and compliance standards while implementing changes in Salesforce operations?
So one area that I think is really important, and it's unfortunately poorly understood and even by others, is what I mentioned, right? If you have something like Salesforce CPQ, now Salesforce is in scope for SOX, right? Because now it's in the revenue stream. And that's something that I think a lot of auditors didn't realize at first, but are starting to wise up to, and are now starting. And we hear this from customers over and over again, that that's a topic that's bubbling up, and their auditors are starting to ask about proving their process around CPQ product config or anything that has to do with pricing. And as I mentioned, obviously all that config is done through creating data records, not through creating metadata components, not through changing code, although you may have some of that, right? But a lot of that takes place by changing data records. And so having a strategy to monitor those changes and track those changes to database config for the purposes of reporting during an audit is something that I highly encourage all of you that are public companies or thinking about going public or are in highly regulated industries to think about. And certainly come talk to us. We recently launched a new product that's designed to specifically address this problem. So we'd love to talk to you about that.
Nice. So when developing a governance framework for Salesforce operations, what are the most important factors to consider and how can they be effectively implemented?
Well, I think it goes back a little bit to what we talked about, right? I don't know if there's a governance framework for revenue operations specifically, right? I mean, there's a governance framework, period, right? And the governance framework needs to work for the business. It needs to work for the needs of the IT organization to mitigate risk. And it needs to work for the business in terms of having or allowing for the agility and the speed that it needs, right? So I don't think there's such a thing as a governance framework for revenue operations. But revenue operations is a stakeholder and a key stakeholder in that conversation. And so if you're on the IT side and you're developing your governance framework and thinking about what is the right level, like where that trade-off lies between speed and control. And I certainly encourage you to bring in your business partners into that conversation and make that decision together.
Okay, great. Well, those appear to be all the questions that we've got. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for attending this LinkedIn Live. We hope you've gained valuable insights into how to optimize your Salesforce operations and drive success in your organizations. So feel free to connect with Max on LinkedIn if you have any further questions. I'd like to give a massive thank you to Max for sharing his expertise and insights with us today. And before we round up, any final words, Max?
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and really looking forward to connecting with many of you around the Salesforce events. And as Zaina said, if you have any questions and want to ping me directly, LinkedIn is a great platform to do that. If you want to learn more about Broadly and how we can help you solve for some of these challenges that we talked about today, I encourage you to visit our website at broadly.co, not com, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, we'll pop that in the chat as well. So great. Well, thank you again to everyone for attending, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.